Welcome to the Costa Rica Travel and Living Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Baker. This is the podcast that chats about everything related to travel and living in this part of the world in Central America. I'm a British expat who's been here for well over 17 years now, so know a thing or two about travel and living in this part of the world. As ever, please don't forget to subscribe and follow along, guys, to wherever you get your podcast to never miss a weekly episode. Today, my guest is Valentina Negri. Originally from Milan, Italy, Valentina first came over in 2001, back then with her partner, after living in the US for a couple of years. She absolutely fell in love with the original road trip that she had planned from Guanacaste all the way through the heart of Costa Rica. She then went on to travel to more than 30 different countries over the course of the next 10 years, until she finally had her child and decided to make the move permanent to Costa Rica well over 10 years ago. She's based in Quepos, Manuel Antonio, and it is a fantastic conversation about culture, everything Costa Rica related, and the real honest vibes of what Pura Vida is and what it means to live in Quepos and Manuel Antonio and the expat community there. I had a fantastic conversation with Valentina, and for sure I will be getting her back on in the next few weeks. So without further ado, let's jump in and meet Valentina. Valentina, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Adam. Doing great.
Very excited to have you on our podcast, our first Italian.
Yeah, I know. Quite unique.
It's great.
I know.
And you're based down in Manuel Antonio. We haven't spoken to anybody down in that region either. So it's a double first.
Wow. And, and it's a pretty cool combination. I mean, Manuel Antonio is such a special place. Like, you see, I don't know if you can see behind, all the forest. And
yeah.
It is true what they say. Like, oh, you can see the monkey for real in Manuel Antonio? I'm like, yeah, I see them in the back of my house almost every day.
It's so true. We were filming the Shana Hotel a couple of months ago. And I know it was famous because I see it all over the social media, the monkeys on Instagram in all the balconies, but wow. Like of all the hotels, that one was, they were just flying through, stealing sugar and whatnot, just chilling out.
Very true. And they have both kinds. They have the white-faced monkey, they have the titi, they also have the howler monkeys.
True.
And I remember one day having lunch there and we had a toucan. I kid you not, like from here to just like 2 meters away from me, just like looking around. It was just so incredible. I was like, wow, it's just right there.
Yeah, no, it's true. And we sometimes take it for granted when we've been here, living here so long, and you travel down and then there's like a sloth, a toucan and a monkey in the tree all at the same time. And then you get this like perfect, typical mix of Costa Rica photograph right there. Hey, I'm going to ask you all about Manuel Antonio, that's for sure today. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you. But as ever, before we jump in, let's give the audience a little bit of an idea of what brought you to Costa Rica. How did your story begin?
Oh, wow. This is actually an interesting story because I used to live in the US for a short period of time. And I was with my partner at that time. And it was like, let's get a change of scenery. And he came home with the world map. And he goes like, you know what? We didn't know where to go. Close your eyes and point your finger. And my finger pointed right in this little strip of land, like Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua. I was like, wow, where are we going to go now? And it was like Costa Rica because a couple of friends of mine in Italy the same year had a vacation to Costa Rica. And they were speaking like just marvelous things about Costa Rica. And I was just like, well, why not? Let's give it a try. It's a safe country. The thing that I loved, it was like, no, you can go there safely. There's no army, just like people are friendly and the nature. So let's just give it a go. So we bought a one-way ticket to San Jose, Costa Rica. 2001.
Wow.
Don't do the math about my age. Just stop right there.
No, not at all. So you were living briefly in the US with your partner and you were like, okay, on the map, bang, your friends had been to Costa Rica. And that was just at the turn of the millennium. So that was as Costa Rica was starting to, I know ecotourism was, I think began between the 94, 98 period here in Costa Rica. The president was proactive for green tourism. And then it was just starting to kind of turn right at the turn of the millennium. I arrived in 2006, so a few years after you, after that first visit. Wow, so that's over 22 years ago for your first trip down here for the first time.
Yeah.
What did you think when you first came? 2001, what was your first, like,
Oh,
opinion?
I was blown away. Like I stepped foot at the airport. I remember walking outside and having the feel of like, my gosh, these are the tropics. Like the air, the smells, like, which were just like so different from what I had ever experienced. We rented a car and the plan was to do from Guanacaste, the very north, so Papagayo going
Yeah.
all the way down close to the Panama border. So it was like a major road trip. And I was like, my gosh, I don't know where we should go because there were no indication at that time. We didn't
Yes.
have any navigators. So
Yeah,
I
that's true.
found the beauty to really talk to people like that and ask directions, like, and having them, very kindly telling us where to go, what to do.
Yeah.
And that feel of not being rushed, like the calmness of the country, the vibe that tells you just go explore, be safe, and have fun, and that was my first thing. And of course, the ocean, the mountains, and just the sense of freedom that this country gave me, like for the first time probably in my life, like open doors to, the world of nature too, so that was pretty amazing as a first moment.
How do you think that's changed 22 years later with the advent of technology, GPS, maps, information that's readily available? Because that's probably quite difficult to have that same experience 2 decades on.
Um, it's so I got lost with my GPS going to Arenal with my car
Okay.
like 6 months ago.
Okay, so it can
So
still happen.
it can still happen because there's so many. It's like going to Rome. All the
Yeah.
roads take to Rome.
All
All
roads
the
lead
roads
to
take to
Rome. Yeah.
yeah, no, but apart from that, I mean, it is definitely easier. There is less of a challenge in that aspect because, we have highways, not many, but there is a better infrastructure. We have more signs, and there is a better knowledge of also Costa Rica as a country, like where
Yeah.
things are. Um, Locals too have developed with it,
Yes, that's true.
so you kind of like, okay, the directions. I remember saying, because you still, when you ask someone like where is something, they're like, okay, it's 3 roads down by the corner in front of the yellow house
Yeah.
right next to the grocery store, and you're like, okay, navigator, can you please tell me where to go?
Where's the yellow store?
Yes, next to the store.
I
So
have this. I have this thing with Costa Ricans back in the day when I used to ask for directions before GPS was a thing. I always found that if you asked 5 locals and you got a majority of 2, you would go with the 2 because very rarely would 2 people say the same thing. That's the other thing. They always want to help you, but sometimes no is I don't know is the best answer.
That is very true. That is very true. That's why now I'm like, I find the beauty of traveling also with I have a child now, so many years have gone by. So the way I travel has also changed a
Yeah.
lot, So I think that it depends really for how much adventure are you ready to have based on with who you travel with,
Yes.
because I find a lot of beauty and also being taken around and go to
Yeah.
places and not have to worry about that aspect as well, like,
Oh,
okay.
I totally get you. That's like an evolution right through life when you're kind of a lot freer in your younger years and you're backpacking and you're spending bare minimum, all these adventures. And then you kind of settle in throughout your 20s, 30s. Maybe there's a child there, you start growing a family and you're working. It progresses for sure in a different way. So you first came over in 2001. How long was that trip? And how long into that trip, or was it a few years after? Did you know you probably wanted to live here in the future?
Yeah, I think I did knew it from the moment I say it was overall 2 years. I did 1 year in Jaco. Back then, Jaco was a different town than what it is today. And then I had a short stay in Chachagua, which is by Arenal volcano. I was back then a horse rider, a professional horse rider. So Costa Rica was just the link between my profession. I didn't know at that time, but that's what
Wow.
it turned out to be. So it was quite beautiful. And when you're young and you're just starting to travel, you don't know, you don't realize that what you see is the best that you're going to see.
Yeah.
that encompasses all the qualities of the country and the people that you're like, oh, this is top, right? So even though I knew, I was like, let's go find out somewhere else. How is the world? Like, the grass is greener somewhere else always,
Yeah. Always.
and
Yeah.
always. So that's what I did. I traveled around the world. I eventually kept coming back every 3 years or so for like a short vacation to visit friends. But in the meantime, I did Europe again, China, South America. It was just like a lot of traveling. And then when I got pregnant, that was my baby was like now 10 years ago. I was like, where do I want to raise my child? Where do I find myself calm, happy, safe too? And after a little bit of thinking, I was like, why not going back to Costa Rica through my pregnancy and give birth there? And that's what happened.
That's
So that was the reason.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. And what a wonderful compliment to Costa Rica after you did all that traveling around the world to then choose to want to give birth and raise your child here and live here. Do you have any idea? Do you remember how many countries more or less you visited in between that period?
Wow.
Top of your head.
I mean, I would say plus 30
So
plus.
isn't that incredible that then Costa Rica comes out on top from your previous experience? You've been around the globe. I think that's amazing. I spoke to one other friend years ago. He was based in Cauita on the Caribbean side. He used to be a travel
Yes.
consultant as well. I remember he told me very clearly, he's from LA, from California originally, and he traveled to 50 plus countries in his life and had chosen to make Costa Rica his home in his 40s when he knew he was going to stay somewhere the long term. And I thought, at the time, I thought, wow, either I've been very fortuitous that I landed in Costa Rica in my early 20s. I've done a fair bit of traveling, post university, but then I'd started my Costa Rican journey there.
Right.
I mean, the downside is I haven't had as many experiences around as many countries as I would have liked yet, but I feel like I've got ahead of the game for those of us that moved to Costa Rica quite young, as opposed to
Right.
retiring there. And
Yes.
you're the second person that I've spoken to that have been, around the world and have still chosen
Right.
Costa Rica, which is, I think it's really nice, and it's a wonderful compliment to the country for everything that you mentioned: the people, the
Sure.
nature, the connection, the freedom, the vibrance.
100%.
Yeah,
You take all the boxes. Give me goosebumps
yeah,
thinking about that in
it's
that
true,
way.
right? Yeah. What was the? I guess it's kind of obviously you love the country upon arrival. What were some of the cultural differences you remember? Some that were great, some that were more challenging, and especially being from Italy. I've been to Italy a couple of times. I spent a lot of time in Spain, and I remember I didn't speak Italian. Nobody understood my English as much, but my Spanish got me by, and the culture seemed similar. Mediterranean climate,
Right.
Portugal, Iberia, and then keep going to the Mediterranean. So, what were some of the differences that you found upon arriving and living here?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one is the Pura Vida culture, really, in the sense of I came from Milan, big cosmopolitan city. Then I lived in LA by the time I arrived in Costa Rica. So, and even though I have a Mediterranean blood, and it was easier possibly for me to learn Spanish because of my Italian, right? So it's just
Yeah,
communication skills are easier. Find that we don't need to run all the time, everywhere, constantly feel this anxiety of it has to be done 10 minutes ago, kind of choose your priorities. Like sometimes it's exasperating when you're like, come on, man, like, let's get things done.
yeah,
But they live happily. So finding the reason why that happiness was in them and contentment about life, we always aspire for more and more and more. And most of the time it's about things, about economical. And don't get me wrong, I'm very happy to be very financially stable and have that freedom. But how about finding the real pleasures in life, which
yeah,
is in down and just looking at the birds, looking at the ocean, and say hello with a smile. And just what he struck me was like, they say really pura vida to give you a welcome and to say goodbye. And it was like, pure life is the
yeah.
meaning. So kind of finding that pure essence of life that we all search. And probably that was what I was searching for. through my travels, between work and travel. So kind of like, oh, now I get what they mean. On a vacation is fantastic. When you work and live in the country, sometimes it can be challenging because we are used to get things done quickly and have it done in the moment, so the kind of, like they say, ahorita, like that means that you think that it means right away.
Totally.
It means ahorita.
Yeah, whenever.
It could be in a 2 like, I saw you, but I'm not sure when is this going to be done, so balancing that is still something that I work on every day. I got much better, but definitely was the biggest cultural adaptation that I had to face.
It's you've worded it really well, because sometimes I summarize it as learning patience, but really the Pura Vida culture term is a really good point, because one of the essential differences when I think about it is that when a local says it, they actually mean it from the heart. So I compare this a lot to British culture, where people are quite polite, but they're not necessarily friendly. They're supposed to be polite. Costa Ricans are friendly, hands down. That when they hey Pura Vida, when they appreciate the nature and you're out and about, it's truthful. There's no other thing behind it.
Very true, Adam. That is absolutely right. They really mean it. They look at you and they really mean what they say.
It's funny to think that you've come from Milan, fashion capital, busting of the world, and then you've gone to LA, on the West Coast, crazy busy, and then you've come to Costa Rica, which is, so if anyone's in a great position to learn that Pura Vida culture and have to kind of get used to it, you'd imagine going from those crazy cities to down here to this kind of life. Yeah, wow. Yeah, that must
no, it was fun. It was great. I mean, it challenged my whole being for sure. And you mentioned fashion and it is one of the things that I love the most about Costa Rica too, is being able to really dress freely. You can have your flip-flops and your t-shirt and your tank top because the weather allows it, and because there is not that scrutiny that we have in the Western culture, where you're like, what are you wearing? What brand are you wearing? And why not? So there is a lot of lightness in that too.
A lot more freeing. And even aside from the culture and your own daily well-being, I think even like you say, the way of living seems to be a lot simpler. Maybe that's, it's a developing country still, but you have your rent, or you own your house, you pay your electricity, your water bill, internet cable, maybe your taxes if you're on the social security system here. But other than that, it's not that complicated month over month. When I go back to the UK and I speak to my sisters or my family members about the number of forms and this, that, and the other, it just seems somewhat exhausting. Thinking, life doesn't have to be this complicated, does it?
Very true. I'll exchange the Pura Vida ahorita term with the bureaucracy like a million times better this with what we have back in Europe or in Northern America as well.
Yeah. No, so did you find that cultural challenge of the Pura Vida culture, that was both a pro and a con, right? Because it's obviously something that becomes wonderful, but it's also a struggle at the start, whether that's just the bureaucracy of getting something done here, or getting stuck in a bank for 2 hours, or you need to do some kind of transaction. It's like, ahorita, like you say. So you've got, I guess it goes both ways.
Well, you know what? It goes always in your favor, always, is kindness and politeness, because they are so like pure people in their essence, right? That they don't understand the other way around just as much as we don't understand their point of view at the beginning. So I find that a please and a thank you and explaining certain situation takes you a long way. And also knowing what it needs to be done in a priority and whatnot.
I think that's a really good point. I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday from another colleague in the travel industry. They made a very good point, is where you can't inflict, and nor should you, your own culture on the Costa Rican culture, because that's where you shouldn't do that in any country if you live abroad. But at the same time, you can also encourage, through constructive conversation, good policies or good methods of doing something that we'll all grow from and will benefit. But when you kind of enforce it, then it becomes a bit of an issue.
Oh, when you enforce it, you're like, okay, you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but like everywhere, who does like to be told in an aggressive manner?
Of course not. Who does?
Correct.
So how long have you now been based in Quepos, Manuel Antonio, and why did you choose the Central Pacific coast?
I've been here now a little over 6 years. Central Pacific Coast, because it was home the first time around, even if it was Jaco, it was Jaco and Manuel Antonio are just an hour away from one another, so very close. So I had my friends, and some of them moved to Quepos Manuel Antonio from Jaco. So that was my connection to come back in this area.
Yeah.
The Central Pacific, and I learned how to love it even more because of the nature. It truly, that is something that when I turn around, I can go to a mountain, I can do a river raft, and I can go surfing with my child in the ocean, and I can go snorkeling, and I'm not too far from San Jose either. You know, that when you have a family and travel and stuff, you don't, you know, I never wanted to be too far from what could have been, you know, important. So Manuel Antonio became my home with time, you know, because I had my doubts. I mean, I'm always like, is this the right choice? I'm in the right place. Should I move this and that? And then I look around and I'm like, I live in a beautiful place and I have the most beautiful community that a person could desire, you know, to grow with my child together, you know, because they have kids. So you create that new family that is your chosen family. We are all expats. So we all have one another, so that we are family for one another. So that what made me stick in Manuel Antonio beside everything else.
Was that an easy process of integrating with an expat community? And you were talking to me before about maybe that you've not found as many Italians abroad, and you find obviously US expats, North American, Canadians, other Europeans. But what's that like in Quepos?
So I consider myself really lucky in that aspect, because when I arrived, my English was already fluent. So I consider myself, I'd like to consider myself an open-minded person. Like, I like to relate more with foreigners than with Italian, because I was like, what is the point if I only get relationship with my, you know, people that come from the same reality?
You
like,
haven't grown up there, have you, in life? You isolate with the people that you left originally.
So what for, you know? And because of my kid's school, you know, he's in an international, in a bilingual school, so we got that, you know, new community. I mean, it was challenging in a way, because we are so different too. You know, the way that the U.S. Citizens just live their life, the way they speak, how they mean things. Like, in Italy, we speak very directly. You know, if I have to tell you you're great or you're not, we say it in face. So I found that not to be quite on my favor at the beginning, because I was like, oh, Valentina is a little bit too straightforward here. Again, I had to. But the reality is that because the majority of them also have they have traveled all over the world, mixed marriages. So it was like a very welcoming, after all, way to be like, hey, you're one of us. There is no more nationality. Like, we're all Costa Ricans, or we'd like to be in a way. So it was good. It was good. Now I would say that my best friends are from the expat community, and American, Canadians, some Italians there too, of course. But it's great. It's great. I love it.
I always find that obviously you meet like-minded people when you travel, and if you meet foreign expats, they're much like us as well. They've decided to live abroad. They've all got their own story, and they're integrating in the culture in the same way. And of course, we all bring our own elements, right, of the culture where we brought up. Here's me with my typical cup of tea, which is always going to, be the case and whatnot. But I always find when you travel and then live abroad, you're meeting like-minded people. So, the communication you mentioned there, your English is impeccable. So it's not so much of an issue. I have a lot of people that said it was sometimes difficult for them when they first started to integrate living abroad because of the Spanish. They're coming from the UK or North America. And that was something that they struggled with. But it's exciting to hear that there's a larger community within Quepos around the Manuel Antonio area. I guess for those who don't know, Manuel Antonio is probably 2.5 hours now with the quality of the roads from San Jose driving. Half an hour flight if you take a small Cessna flight. And of course, like you mentioned, people forget that Manuel Antonio south all the way to the Osa is the proper primary rainforest. There's rainforest all over the country, but actual primary rainforest as opposed to secondary. So you're right on the edge of getting the very best nature all the way down. It's a lot richer, a lot denser, a lot greener.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We have the wildlife corridor, and that wildlife corridor starts here,
Yes.
really.
Yeah.
You know, and we have all from mammals to birds to marine wildlife that is incredible all year round. And,
Yeah.
when you have in the rest of Costa Rica, the difference between, when you are in the dry season, summertime, some regions get a little bit drier. Like here, it is green and lush all the time. And
Yeah.
that is the beauty of that too, that when you turn around, you see always these green mountains. And the beauty of a typical thunderstorm of the rain jungle forest.
It's amazing, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And you're like, let me say my balcony, have my coffee or a glass of wine, depending on the time of day, and just hear the rain.
I used to think that when people download apps, right, to sleep well with all the nature sounds and the rain. I'm like, well, in Costa Rica, that is your app. It's outside, especially in the rain season when it's green and it's coming down. It's just like, it's amazing. It like never ceases to amaze me how beautiful that is.
Yes, yes, absolutely right. So when people, is it gonna rain? Well, hopefully you'll experience the rain in Costa Rica because
exactly, you should get a good mix. There's two things I wanted to ask you that I've always wondered, and that maybe there's a negative aspect to this question, so twofold. Firstly, it would be good if you could explain where you live, because Quepos is the main town that then leads over this maybe 1.5 2-mile hill that leads into the village of Manuel Antonio, which is famous for the national park and the beautiful beaches. But we don't really sell, at least Costa Rican Vacations, not too many hotels in the town of Quepos, because occasionally it appears a little bit run down. You kind of arrive, it's a bit sketchy at night, it's really hot, 35 degrees and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You drive through, you get on the hill, you see the surrounding village, an extension of the town, a lot of homes, the football pitch on the top, and then you get to the lovely restaurants, then the nice hotels start to kind of appear all the way to the park. Right. So firstly, my question, part one is, what's that like in Quepos now? How's it grown? And is it still really, is it seedy? Is it okay? Has it got better? And then the second one relates more to the environment with the growth of the Manuel Antonio National Park, which of course is one of the smallest in the country, most photographed and most visited. Closed now on Tuesdays so that the wildlife gets a breather. And they've done some work over the last few years. How have you seen the growth in the last 20 years? And how do you think it's having an impact for good or bad? There's two questions there.
Yes. Yeah. So I live right off Quepos. So 1 mile off Quepos, right before the entrance of town from the mountains. To me, this is a strategic location because I am at 20 minutes away from the mountains and the river. I am 10 minutes away from, Manuel Antonio, 2 minutes away from Quepos. That right now, with the marina, we have Marina Pesvela now.
That's
that
really
has
nice.
brought like a big cleanup, like in the sense of we now have a fantastic promenade right on the beach, because Quepos is a port, but it's right on the beach where you can actually surf from there. So where people meet in the evenings, locals, foreigners, to have a walk, watch the sunset, have an ice cream. So you have a lot of more little restaurants, cafes, and things that you can, shops, that you can actually have a pleasant, nice afternoon there, right? It's a small town. So once you do these 2-3 roads,
you're done,
you're done. But we have banks, post office, like everything that we need to do is up there. My son loves it. He's like, why don't we go to Quepos? We go to the whatever, buy candies and stuff, because it's very cultural. Like, so when I have my travelers coming to Manuel Antonio, I advise them to spend a few hours one afternoon in Quepos, because that cultural aspect is when you get it. As you said, when you go up the hill, you know that when you have the hotels, you have the restaurants, it's more travelers oriented. And Quepos is actually the town where the real people that live here are. So your tour guides, your tour operators, your hotels, or all that is, they are down at the bottom. that has changed much. So Quepos town has been cleaned up quite a lot. It's still not a place where I would spend my, evening and go out and bars, because that is Manuel Antonio where you want to do it. Okay. So the change, if anything, has been positive. Like when sometimes you're like, is the advance of having in a marina or more investments, sometimes it can be detrimental to a location. In this case, for Quepos, I find that it is given so much opportunities to everybody around, both in, with sport fishing, but also giving jobs to the local community that made it prosperate, right?
Yeah.
So that, to me, if anything, I find it more pleasant to live in Quepos than before. What was your second question about Manuel Antonio and
the national park.
going up at National Park? Wow. So the national park, we have 1 day a week that for locals that we live here, it is like 1,000 colones. We can go there with our families and just spend nothing. So I love to go to the park.
Yeah.
And be there. And I think that if anything, it's a blessing that we have that with the beautiful structure that is also in the park. Is like friendly for young kids, for elderly, like, the wheelchair accessible, like all those things that make it really easy for everyone to see our natural wonders, okay, without needing to hike and stuff. The beach. I think it is important to have it controlled in order to preserve that uniqueness. So I find that it is positive what they're doing now. They're kind of like regulating how many people can get in and out, because we want to make sure that we have this for so many more years. We don't want that to end.
So
and that's why it's also so important to have Manuel Antonio, very active group that helps that prevention, when there are new construction, new building, how is this going to affect our wildlife, and this is a legacy that we're going to give to our kids.
For sure, and for the long run, because I remember when I first came down, it was an amazing place to visit Manuel Antonio. You could still walk into the park around the bluff. When the tide was out, you could go around to the beach, which was then cut off, and there was like a small boat, and you'd have to avoid the crocodile to get in, kind of thing. Beware of the crocs. So that's changed a lot, even in my time here. And I remember, a few years ago seeing a deer, and she had one of her small calves, and they just weren't afraid of the humans going through, and there was a lot of foot traffic. And obviously it's a surprise, because in a lot of other parts of Costa Rica, you do see the wildlife in its natural element, and it will, generally run away. Part of the amazing part of going to Osa is you spot, if you're lucky, jaguars, ocelots, tapirs, and they will keep their distance. But obviously when you have so much foot traffic, because it is incredible, you have that impact. So it's really nice to see that those regulations are obviously being put into place for the park, for the ecosystem, because you do get a lot of people. And I hope now that a lot of the park tickets that are automated, you have to pre-book your ticket now, with I think 7 or 8 now national parks in the country. Correct. That might help that traffic and that organization. It's just one of those.
Absolutely. They're doing a great job with that. Like, you can see they're actively making sure that it can be a safe place for the animals.
Yes.
We want them there. We don't want them to go anywhere else. So, right?
Was it the 70s that I think it was put together, the Manuel Antonio National Park? Maybe I'm off, but I remember the reason that it was closed, for that corridor of wildlife, and it is beautiful. Obviously, Cathedral Point, the 2 or 3 beaches, it's just iconic, right, in Costa Rica.
Correct.
So maintaining it and preserving it is essential. It's really exciting to hear what you said. Obviously, the marina's been up and running for a number of years now, and I think it's a really good point. I remember that seeing the difference when I first traveled through Quepos, thinking, oh, this is hot and bizarre. I was, kind of going on around the hostels on the local buses back and forth from San Jose in the bus stop.
Yes.
And seeing the difference. You talk about the promenade and the fishing events and all the tours that leave from the new marina do bring a whole different vibe to the place, which is a bit more modern and a bit nicer. Probably is great for the locals as well to see that kind of
Oh my God. Plus, it's open, like they do so many things over the summer. If it is the movie theater, or they do events that are open to the whole community. Sometimes you find that when these new marinas are built, they're a little bit classist. Yes. Like if you have a boat, you can get there. Otherwise, no. And this is very inclusive.
Yeah.
They really want the whole community to cheer for this project and to be part of it. So it's amazing.
It's such a good point. And when you look at other areas around the country where that community is inclusive, I even think about, the Los Sueños property just outside Jaco that's been around for nearly 30 years. People don't realize you can just drive in there and you can enjoy the marina and the shops, but maybe it's a little bit more off the beaten path from those locals that live in the Jaco community. So you don't immediately think it's so accessible, as opposed to having Quepos is right there and you can walk from the promenade to the marina.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly that. Very good point. Absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to keep you for too much longer, Valentina. I have so many questions to ask you. I think we should get you back on the podcast in the near future, because I would love to hear more about the hotels that you like to offer, the places that are off the beaten path, and even the general area of Manuel Antonio. I think that can be a whole podcast in itself.
Yes.
So let's organize something in a couple of weeks and talk about some of those gems in and around the Central Pacific, where you like to
For sure. Count on that. I love to. It's fun. It's fun talking to you.
No, it's been really great talking to you, and also getting a different perspective about, living locally. There's a couple of restaurants as well off the top of my head that I'm a big fan of right there on the top of the hill. And it's always fun going back to Manuel Antonio. It's never a dull moment. And of course, if you go in the low season, it's even a bit quieter and you get to enjoy those beaches, right?
Yes. Of course, like this is when we love it the most. Like Manuel Antonio is all for us in a way. But when the travelers come at that time of year, they can really see how they live.
It's very true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final question before I leave you: are you here in Costa Rica for the long run?
Yes.
Yeah. Nice and easy. No.
I've been through. I asked myself this question a couple of years ago, and again a year ago. When you have your kid growing, you always ask this question: am I in the right place? Is this correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm here for the long run. Like, how not? So
I love it. It's a very infectious attitude. Valentina, I will put your contact information in the description box in YouTube, and also for all the other our other podcast platforms, so people can reach out to you if they want to get more information on Quepos, Manuel Antonio, or just coming down to Costa Rica.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Love to have them.
Absolute pleasure. Speak to you very soon, Valentina. Thank you very much.
Ciao, Adam. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
What a fantastic chat there with Valentina. Full of enthusiasm and real just a vibrance for life that she has. And what an amazing journey from Milan to LA to Costa Rica. And only maybe 35 countries of travel there in between before she's decided to make Costa Rica her home. For sure, I will be getting Valentina back, hopefully next month, to talk more about Manuel Antonio, the surrounding hotels, and of course those hidden gems that you should probably find out if you're planning to travel to that part of the world. You can find Valentina's credentials, her contact information below, if you want to reach out to Valentina directly. Please, as ever, guys, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like, as that really helps us out, and follow along to wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss one of our weekly episodes. So for myself, Adam Baker, I will see you guys next week. Hasta la próxima.